Imagine being the richest person on the planet. Not just wealthy, obscenely wealthy. Imagine having more gold than you could count, palaces that made other kings jealous, and enough wisdom that world leaders traveled thousands of miles just to ask you one question. Now imagine having access to anything your heart desired. Any pleasure, any experience, any relationship. If you could dream it, you could have it. No limits, no boundaries, no one to tell you no. But what no one knew was, in the middle of all that abundance, you felt absolutely nothing. Empty, hollow, like you were chasing something that kept slipping through your fingers no matter how hard you grabbed. This was King Solomon's reality. And at the end of his life, after testing every theory about happiness, after trying every possible path to fulfillment, he wrote one of the most brutally honest books in human history, the Book of Ecclesiastes. And in it, he revealed a truth that most people spend their entire lives refusing to accept. A truth that, if he had learned it earlier, would have saved him decades of pain, regret, and emptiness. What happened next left everyone in shock. Because Solomon didn't write a book about how to get rich. He didn't write about how to be successful. He wrote about why none of it matters if you miss the one thing that actually does. I'm so glad you're joining me today. If you're new to life in Christ, this is where we go deep into God's Word to discover truths that actually transform how we live. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what we're about to uncover will challenge everything our culture teaches about happiness, success, and the good life. Today, we're diving into the mind of a man who had it all and discovered it was nothing. A man who searched everywhere and found the answer in the last place he expected. And that's when everything changed. For him. And maybe, if you're ready to hear it, for you too. Let's begin. We live in a world that's absolutely obsessed with happiness. Billions of dollars are spent every year on self-help books, motivational seminars, therapy sessions, life coaches, all promising to unlock the secret to a happy life. And what do they tell us? They say happiness comes from success, from achieving your goals, from financial freedom, from finding the right partner, from looking good, feeling good, living your best life. Social media feeds are flooded with people showcasing their perfect lives. The dream vacation, the luxury car, the beautiful family, the corner office, the beach body. And the message is always the same. This is what happiness looks like. Get this, and you'll be happy too. But what no one knew was this is the oldest lie in human history. It's the same lie that deceived Solomon. It's the same trap that's been catching people for thousands of years. And it goes like this. Happiness is just one more achievement away. One more purchase. One more promotion. One more relationship. One more experience. Just a little bit more, and then you'll finally be satisfied. Solomon believed this lie. How do I know? Because Ecclesiastes 2 verse 10 says, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. Nothing. He denied himself nothing. If he wanted it, he got it. If it promised happiness, he tried it. If it looked good, he pursued it. And you know what he discovered at the end of all that pursuing? Ecclesiastes 2 verse 11. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Meaningless. Chasing after the wind. You ever try to catch the wind? You run after it, you reach for it, you exhaust yourself trying to grab it, and it just slips through your fingers every single time. At that moment, he felt as if the world had played a cruel joke on him. Everything society promised would bring happiness didn't. Everything culture said would bring fulfillment couldn't. Everything he had been taught to pursue failed. And here's what's tragic. Most people today are making the exact same mistake. They're climbing the same ladder Solomon climbed. They're chasing the same wind Solomon chased. They're believing the same lies Solomon believed. And they won't discover the truth until it's too late. Until they've wasted decades. Until they've sacrificed what actually matters for what ultimately doesn't. And that's when everything changed in how we need to think about happiness. Because if the richest, wisest, most successful man in history discovered that success doesn't equal happiness, maybe, just maybe, we need to stop listening to the world's definition and start listening to his warning. So what did Solomon learn? What was the truth he discovered too late? That's what we're about to uncover. Solomon decided to run an experiment. He thought, if wisdom alone can't bring happiness, maybe pleasure can. Maybe joy is found in simply enjoying life to the fullest. So he threw himself into the pursuit of pleasure with the kind of resources most people can only dream about. Ecclesiastes 2 verses 1 to 3 describes his methodology. I said to myself, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. Notice something important here. Solomon wasn't being reckless. His mind was still guiding him with wisdom. This wasn't a drunken binge or mindless hedonism. This was a calculated experiment, a scientific test. He wanted to answer the question, can pleasure bring lasting happiness? He had the best wine money could buy, not the cheap stuff. The finest vineyards in the ancient world were at his disposal. He had entertainment, musicians, dancers, comedians, performers from every nation. He had feasts that would make modern celebrity parties look modest. Whatever brought pleasure, he pursued it. Whatever made people laugh, he experienced it. Whatever promised joy, he tried it. But what no one knew was that pleasure has a fatal flaw built into it. It's temporary. The first taste is incredible. The second is satisfying. But by the 100th time, it becomes routine. By the 1,000th time, it becomes boring. Solomon discovered what neuroscience now confirms. The human brain adapts to pleasure. What thrilled you yesterday doesn't thrill you today. What satisfied you last month leaves you empty this month. You need more, stronger, newer experiences just to feel the same level of enjoyment. It's like drinking salt water when you're thirsty. The first sip gives temporary relief, but it actually makes you thirstier. So you drink more, which makes you need more, which makes you drink more, in an endless cycle that never truly satisfies. At that moment, he felt as if the world was offering him a menu of pleasures, but none of them could fill the hunger in his soul. The laughter felt hollow. The wine tasted flat. The entertainment became predictable. The novelty wore off. And here's what he concluded in Ecclesiastes 2 verse 2. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? What does pleasure accomplish? That's the haunting question. When the party's over, when the high wears off, when the excitement fades, what are you left with? The same emptiness you started with. Maybe even deeper emptiness. Because now you've proven to yourself that even pleasure can't fix what's broken inside. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's search. Pleasure failed the test. It couldn't deliver what it promised. It was another form of chasing wind. But Solomon wasn't done experimenting. If pleasure couldn't bring happiness, maybe accomplishment could. Maybe meaning was found in building something great, in achieving something significant, in leaving a legacy that would last. So he turned his attention to the next experiment. If pleasure was empty, Solomon thought, maybe purpose is found in productivity, in building, in creating, in accomplishing something significant that outlasts your lifetime. So he launched into the most ambitious building program in Israel's history. Ecclesiastes 2 verses 4 to 6 describes his projects. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. Great projects, not small renovations, not modest improvements. Great projects. He built multiple houses, not just one palace. He planted entire vineyards that covered hillsides. He created gardens that would rival the hanging gardens of Babylon. He engineered water systems that irrigated vast groves of trees. According to 1 Kings 7 verse 1, his own palace took 13 years to build. 13 years of continuous construction. Thousands of workers. The finest materials. Cedar from Lebanon. Stone quarried from the earth. precious metals overlaid on walls. But it wasn't just about buildings. Solomon built entire cities. He fortified Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. He created storage cities for his chariots. He built a naval fleet. He established trade routes that brought wealth flowing into Israel from every corner of the known world. He wrote 3,000 proverbs, 1,005 songs. He studied everything from the cedars of Lebanon to the hyssop growing in walls. He cataloged animals, birds, reptiles, and fish. He essentially created the first encyclopedia of natural science in the ancient world. The man was productive, relentlessly, exhaustively productive. If there was something to build, he built it. If there was knowledge to acquire, he acquired it. If there was a project worth doing, he did it. But what no one knew was that achievement, like pleasure, has a hidden problem. It asks the question, and then what? You build the palace. Beautiful. Magnificent. And then what? You finish the project. Impressive. Groundbreaking. And then what? You accomplish the goal. Celebrated. Honored. And then what? There's always another project waiting. Always another goal to chase. Always another achievement to pursue. The finish line keeps moving. The satisfaction is temporary. And the question haunts you. Is this all there is? At that moment, he felt as if the world was applauding his accomplishments, but he couldn't hear it over the emptiness echoing in his chest. He looked at everything he had built and felt nothing. Pride? Maybe for a moment. But fulfillment? No. Ecclesiastes 2 verse 11 captures his disillusionment. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Everything. Not some things. Not most things. Everything was meaningless. All the buildings. All the accomplishments. All the projects. All the productivity. Meaningless. Why? Because accomplishment by itself can't answer the deepest questions of the human soul. Who am I? Why am I here? What's the point of any of this? Achievement might distract you from those questions for a while, but it can't answer them. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's understanding. He realized that building a kingdom on earth doesn't satisfy a soul made for eternity. Creating monuments that will crumble doesn't fulfill a heart longing for something permanent. But if pleasure fails and achievement fails, what's left? Where else could Solomon look? He turned his attention to something even more fundamental to human happiness: relationships. Solomon had read the ancient texts. He knew what God said in the beginning. It is not good for the man to be alone. Humans were created for relationship, for connection, for intimacy. Maybe happiness wasn't found in things or achievements. Maybe it was found in people. So Solomon pursued relationships with an intensity that matched everything else he did. According to 1 Kings 11 verse 3, he had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. 1,000 women. Let that sink in for a moment. 1,000 women. Not just marriages, but political alliances sealed through marriage. Daughters of Pharaoh, Moabite princesses, Ammonite noble women, Edomite royalty, Sidonians, Hittites. Each marriage represented a treaty, a connection, a relationship that supposedly brought peace and prosperity. But what no one knew was that you cannot love everyone. Real love, genuine intimacy, true connection requires focus, devotion, exclusivity. You can have 1,000 acquaintances, but you cannot have 1,000 intimate relationships. Solomon had wives he barely knew, women whose names he probably couldn't remember, entire palaces full of people, and yet he was completely alone, surrounded by faces but connected to none of them. Ecclesiastes 4 verse 8 describes this exact condition. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. For whom am I toiling? That's the question of a lonely man. That's the cry of someone who has people around him but no one with him. He's working, building, achieving, but there's no one to truly share it with. No one who really knows him. no one he's truly vulnerable with. And worse, these relationships, rather than bringing him closer to God, pulled him away. 1 Kings 11 verse 4 records the tragic result. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. His wives turned his heart. They wanted to worship their gods. They wanted altars to Ashtoreth, Molech, Chemosh. And Solomon, in his desire to please them, to maintain peace, to keep everyone happy, compromised. He built high places for foreign gods. He participated in pagan worship. He divided his heart. At that moment, he felt as if the world was closing in on him. He had sought connection and found division. He had pursued intimacy and found isolation. He had wanted love and gotten political arrangements. He had 1,000 relationships and not one true companion. The Bible says in 1 Kings 11 verse 9, "The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice." Appeared to him twice. God didn't just speak through prophets. He didn't just send messages. He appeared to Solomon, personally, directly, twice. And still, Solomon's heart wandered. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's relationships. God declared judgment. The kingdom would be torn from his son. Civil war would come. Everything Solomon built would fracture because he had allowed relationships to become idols, because he had sought fulfillment in people rather than in God. Relationships, like pleasure and achievement, proved to be another broken cistern, another empty well, another path that promised satisfaction but delivered only disappointment. So if pleasure fails and achievement fails and relationships fail, where does that leave us? What else is there? Solomon turned to something that billions of people today believe is the answer to everything: money. Solomon was the richest man in the ancient world. According to 1 Kings 10 verse 14, his annual income was 666 talents of gold. That's approximately 25 tons of gold per year. In today's economy, we're talking about billions of dollars. Silver was so common in Jerusalem during his reign that 1 Kings 10 verse 27 says he made silver as common as stones. Imagine that. A metal we consider precious was literally as abundant as rocks on the street. He had everything money could buy: the finest clothes, the most exotic foods, rare spices from distant lands, servants to meet his every need, treasures from every nation. His wealth was beyond calculation. And surely, with that kind of financial security, with that level of abundance, he must have been happy, right? Isn't that what we're all told? That money might not buy happiness, but it sure makes misery more comfortable. But what no one knew was that Solomon discovered a brutal truth about wealth. The more you have, the more you worry about losing it. The more you accumulate, the more you need to protect. The richer you become, the less you sleep. Listen to what he wrote in Ecclesiastes 5 verses 10 to 12. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. The sleep of a laborer is sweet. The simple farmer who works hard all day, eats his simple meal, and sleeps soundly on his mat has something Solomon, with all his wealth, couldn't buy: peace. Solomon lay awake at night worrying about thieves, worrying about corrupt officials stealing from the treasury, worrying about economic instability, worrying about which son would inherit what, worrying about trade routes and political alliances, and whether his wealth would last. His abundance permitted him no sleep. The very thing that was supposed to bring security brought anxiety instead. The very thing that promised freedom became a prison. At that moment, he felt as if the world was laughing at him. He had more money than he could ever spend, and yet he couldn't enjoy it. He had treasures piled high, and yet they brought no satisfaction. He had financial security that kings would envy, and yet he felt completely insecure. Ecclesiastes 5 verses 13 to 14 describes something even worse. I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children there is nothing left for them to inherit. Wealth lost through some misfortune. Solomon had seen it happen. Rich men brought to ruin by a single bad decision. Wealthy families bankrupted by war. Fortunes lost in a moment. All that accumulation, all that effort, all that hoarding, gone in an instant. And even if you keep your wealth until death, so what? Ecclesiastes 5 verses 15 to 16 drives the point home. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. You come into this world with nothing. You leave with nothing. Everything in between is just temporary stewardship of things that were never really yours to begin with. And that's when everything changed in how Solomon viewed money. He stopped seeing it as the solution and started seeing it as another distraction, another false promise, another empty pursuit that couldn't deliver what it advertised. Money can buy a bed, but it can't buy sleep. It can buy a house, but it can't buy a home. It can buy companions, but it can't buy friendship. It can buy pleasure, but it can't buy joy. It can buy everything except the one thing every human heart is searching for, meaning. So pleasure failed. Achievement failed. Relationships failed. Wealth failed. Solomon had tested every theory. He had tried every path. He had exhausted every option the world offered for finding happiness. And he was still empty, still searching, still asking the same haunting question. What's the point of any of this? But in his desperation, Solomon was about to stumble onto something. A clue, a thread, a possibility that maybe, just maybe, he had been looking in all the wrong places. Solomon had avoided thinking about it for years. Death, the one reality everyone tries to ignore. The one subject our culture does everything possible to avoid discussing. But as Solomon grew older, as his experiments continued to fail, he could no longer escape it. He began to observe death with the same intensity he had observed everything else. And what he discovered shook him to his core. Ecclesiastes 2 verses 14 to 16 captures his realization. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. The same fate overtakes them both. The wise man and the fool end up in the same place. Death doesn't care about your IQ. It doesn't care about your accomplishments. It doesn't care about your bank account or your reputation or how many people showed up to your parties. Solomon walked through the royal cemetery and saw the graves of great men, kings who had ruled with power, warriors who had won legendary battles, wise men whose counsel had shaped nations. And now, their bones were indistinguishable from the bones of servants and slaves. But what no one knew was that this realization was driving Solomon into an existential crisis. If death makes everything equal, if the end result is the same for everyone, then what's the point of wisdom? What's the point of achievement? What's the point of anything? He wrote in Ecclesiastes 3 verses 19 to 20, surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over the animals. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. Humans have no advantage over the animals. That's despair talking. That's a man who has lost all hope. That's someone who can't see any difference between human existence and animal existence, if both end in the grave. At that moment, he felt as if the world was a cosmic joke with death as the punchline. Everything you build crumbles. Everyone you love dies. Every achievement is forgotten. Every legacy fades. Time erases everything. and death guarantees that erasure is complete. Solomon even went so far as to say in Ecclesiastes 4 verses 2 to 3, "And I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is the one who has never been born, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. Better to have never been born." Those are the words of a man in deep darkness, a man who has searched everywhere for meaning and found nothing but emptiness, a man who is staring into the void and seeing no light, no hope, no purpose. But here's what's crucial to understand. Solomon wasn't wrong about death being inescapable. He wasn't wrong about it being the great equalizer. He wasn't wrong about it making earthly pursuits seem futile. What he was missing, what he hadn't yet grasped, was that death isn't the end of the story. It's the transition. And how you live in light of death, how you prepare for what comes after, that's what gives life meaning. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's perspective. He was about to have a breakthrough, not because he stopped thinking about death, but because he started thinking about it correctly. He started asking not just what happens when we die, but whether there's anything beyond death, whether there's a judgment, whether this life is preparing us for something eternal. These questions were leading him somewhere uncomfortable, somewhere that required him to face not just his mortality, but his accountability. Because if death isn't the end, if there's something after, then suddenly everything you do in this life takes on a different significance. As Solomon contemplated death and eternity, he began to see the world with new eyes. And what he saw broke his heart. Injustice, oppression, evil prospering while good suffered. And it filled him with rage and confusion. Ecclesiastes 4 verse 1 captures his anguish. "Again I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. They have no comforter." That phrase appears twice in one verse. Do you hear the pain in that repetition? Solomon saw people suffering, crying out for help, and no one came. The powerful crushed the weak, and there was no justice. The rich exploited the poor, and there was no accountability. He saw laborers work to exhaustion for wages that barely fed their families. He saw widows cheated out of their inheritances. He saw orphans abandoned in the streets. He saw honest people destroyed by corrupt officials. He saw the guilty walk free, while the innocent were punished. And what horrified him most was Ecclesiastes 3 verse 16. "And I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there." In the place of judgment, in the courts, in the very system designed to protect the innocent and punish the guilty, wickedness was there. Judges took bribes. Officials perverted justice for personal gain. The legal system that should have been society's safeguard had become society's weapon against the vulnerable. But what no one knew was that Solomon felt personally responsible for some of this injustice. He was the king. This was his kingdom. These were his courts, his judges, his officials. And yet he couldn't stop the corruption. He couldn't fix the system. No matter how many reforms he implemented, the rot always returned. Ecclesiastes 5 verse 8 explains why. "If you see the poor oppressed in a district and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things. For one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are others higher still." The corruption was systemic. One official protected another, who protected another, who protected another. The entire structure was compromised. And even the king, with all his power, couldn't dismantle it completely. At that moment, he felt as if the world was fundamentally broken beyond human repair. Evil wasn't just individual bad choices. It was structural. It was institutional. It was woven into the fabric of society itself. And no amount of wisdom, wealth, or power could fix it. Solomon wrestled with the biggest theological question of all. If God is good and God is powerful, why does he allow this? Why do the wicked prosper? Why do the righteous suffer? Where is divine justice? Ecclesiastes 8 verse 14 voices his confusion. There's something else meaningless that occurs on earth. the righteous who get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. This too, I say, is meaningless. Good people getting punished, evil people getting rewarded, the scales completely unbalanced, the books completely wrong, and God apparently doing nothing about it. This shook Solomon's faith to its core. If there's no justice in this life, if evil goes unpunished and good goes unrewarded, then what kind of universe are we living in? What kind of God allows this? And that's when everything changed in Solomon's theology. He was wrestling with something profound, something that would eventually lead him to a revelation. Because the injustice of this world only makes sense, only becomes bearable, if you believe in something beyond this world. If death is the end, then injustice wins. The oppressor dies peacefully. The oppressed dies in suffering. And that's it. Game over. Evil triumphs. But what if death isn't the end? What if there's a judgment coming? What if every hidden thing will be revealed? What if God is keeping a record, and the day of accounting is still ahead? That possibility, that hope, was beginning to form in Solomon's mind. And it was about to change everything. In the midst of his despair over injustice, Solomon began to notice something. A pattern, a rhythm, something woven into the fabric of creation that spoke of order, purpose, and divine orchestration. And he wrote one of the most beautiful passages in all of Scripture. Ecclesiastes 3 verses 1 to 8. There's a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. There is a time for everything, not chaos, not randomness, not meaningless suffering, a time, a season, a purpose, an order. Solomon was beginning to see that life operates in cycles, birth and death, planting and harvest, mourning and dancing, war and peace. And these cycles aren't arbitrary. They're part of a larger design, a bigger picture. But what no one knew was that Solomon couldn't see the full picture. He could observe the pattern, but he couldn't understand the purpose behind it. And that frustrated him deeply. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 captures both his insight and his limitation. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. Everything beautiful in its time. There's the key. In its time. What seems ugly now might be beautiful later. What feels like destruction now might be preparation for building later. What looks like death now might be the seed of resurrection later. But God has also set eternity in the human heart. That's why nothing temporal satisfies us. That's why pleasure, achievement, wealth, and relationships all leave us empty. We were created for eternity, and only eternal things can fulfill us. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. We can't see the whole story. We're living in the middle chapters of a book we can't fully comprehend. We see snippets, moments, seasons, but not the complete narrative. At that moment, he felt as if the world was starting to make a different kind of sense. Not complete sense. Not the clarity he wanted, but enough sense to realize that maybe, just maybe, his perspective was too limited. Maybe the problem wasn't that life is meaningless. Maybe the problem was that he was evaluating everything from a temporal viewpoint rather than an eternal one. Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes 3 verses 14 to 15, I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it so that people will fear him. Whatever is has already been, and what will be has been before, and God will call the past to account. Everything God does endures forever. That's the difference. Solomon's buildings would crumble. His wealth would be redistributed. His achievements would be forgotten. But what God does, that lasts. That matters. That has eternal significance. And God does it so that people will fear Him. Not terror, but reverence, awe, a recognition that we're not the center of the universe, that there's a power, a wisdom, a purpose far beyond our comprehension. And the proper response is humility, worship, surrender. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's search for meaning. He stopped demanding immediate answers and started trusting the one who knows all the answers. He stopped requiring visible justice in this lifetime and started believing in ultimate justice in God's timing. He stopped trying to control the seasons and started learning to live faithfully within them. But this raised a new question. If God is sovereign over time, if He has a purpose for everything, then how should we live? What's the appropriate response to a life we can't fully understand? Solomon was about to discover that the answer wasn't more knowledge or more control. The answer was something far simpler and far more difficult. After all his searching, after all his experiments, after all his philosophical wrestling, Solomon began to notice something he had completely overlooked in his frantic pursuit of meaning. The simple gifts, the everyday blessings, the ordinary joys that God sprinkles throughout life like grace notes in a symphony. He wrote in Ecclesiastes 2 verses 24 to 25, "A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too, I see, is from the hand of God, for without Him, who can eat or find enjoyment?" At first glance, this might sound like Solomon giving up, like he's saying nothing matters, so just eat and drink and try to enjoy yourself before you die. But look closer. He says this satisfaction, this enjoyment, is from the hand of God. It's not resignation, it's revelation. Solomon had spent decades chasing extraordinary pleasures, building magnificent monuments, accumulating massive wealth, and he had missed the extraordinary beauty hidden in ordinary moments. A good meal shared with friends, honest work that brings satisfaction, a peaceful night's sleep, the warmth of the sun on your face, the taste of cold water when you're thirsty, the laughter of genuine friendship, the simple pleasure of rest after labor. But what no one knew was that these gifts had been available to him every single day. They had been there all along, waiting to be received, waiting to be enjoyed. But he had been too busy, too distracted, too focused on bigger things to notice them. Ecclesiastes 3 verses 12 to 13 expands this understanding. "I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God." The gift of God, not the achievement of humanity, not the reward for hard work, not the result of wisdom or wealth or power. A gift, something you receive, not something you earn, something you accept, not something you manufacture. Solomon realized he had been trying to create happiness through his own efforts, trying to manufacture meaning through his own achievements, trying to build fulfillment through his own resources. And it had all failed because happiness can't be created. It can only be received. At that moment, he felt as if the world was whispering a secret he had been deaf to for decades. Happiness wasn't at the top of the mountain. It was along the path. Meaning wasn't in the destination. It was in the journey. Fulfillment wasn't in extraordinary achievements. It was in faithful presence in ordinary moments. Ecclesiastes 5 verses 18 to 20 beautifully captures this wisdom. "This is what I have observed to be good, that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to be satisfied with their work during the few days of life God has given them, for this is their lot. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil, this is a gift of God. They seldom reflect on the days of their life, because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart." God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart. What a beautiful phrase. When you learn to receive God's simple gifts with gratitude, when you learn to find joy in ordinary moments, you don't have time to spiral into existential despair. You're too busy being grateful. Solomon thought about the simple farmer he had observed earlier. The man who worked hard, ate his bread with joy, slept soundly, and woke up grateful for another day. That man, with his modest life and simple pleasures, had what Solomon, with all his wealth and wisdom, had been searching for: contentment, peace, the ability to enjoy what you have without constantly craving what you don't. And that's when everything changed. Solomon stopped measuring his life by what he had accomplished and started measuring it by how well he received what God had given. He stopped comparing himself to others and started thanking God for his unique portion. He stopped chasing wind and started resting in God's provision. But even these simple joys, as wonderful as they are, aren't the ultimate answer. They're not the final destination. They're signposts. They're hints. They're clues pointing to something greater. Because if God gives these good gifts, what does that tell us about God himself? If temporal blessings bring temporary joy, what would eternal communion with the giver bring? Solomon was getting closer to the truth, but he still had one more critical discovery to make. Solomon had been dancing around the issue for years, testing theories, running experiments, trying every path except the one that mattered most. And now, finally, he was ready to confront the central question of human existence. What does it mean to live life under the sun? That phrase appears 29 times in Ecclesiastes. Under the sun. It means living as if this world is all there is. Living horizontally, without the vertical dimension. Living as if there is no God. No eternity, no judgment, no ultimate meaning beyond what we can see and touch and measure. And Solomon's conclusion about that way of life? Ecclesiastes 1 verse 14. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. All of them. Not some. Not most. All of them are meaningless if you live as if this world is all there is. Because if there's no God, then there's no ultimate purpose. If there's no eternity, then nothing you do has lasting significance. If there's no judgment, then justice is just a human invention that powerful people can ignore. But what no one knew was that Solomon himself had been living this way for decades. Oh, he believed in God intellectually. He had built God's temple. He had offered sacrifices. He had performed all the religious duties. But his heart, his priorities, his daily decisions, those had been lived under the sun, as if God was a distant concept rather than a present reality. Ecclesiastes 1 verses 2 to 3 summarizes his findings. Meaningless. Meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? What do people gain? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. If you remove God from the equation, if you live as if this world is all there is, then every achievement is temporary. Every relationship ends. Every pleasure fades. Every accomplishment is forgotten. Death erases everything, and nothing lasts. Solomon had tested pleasure. Meaningless under the sun. He had tested achievement. Meaningless under the sun. He had tested wealth. Meaningless under the sun. He had tested wisdom itself. And even wisdom, without God, was meaningless. Ecclesiastes 1 verses 16 to 18 reveals his painful discovery. I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom, and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this, too, is a chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. With much wisdom comes much sorrow. Why? Because wisdom, without God, just helps you see more clearly how broken everything is. Knowledge, without meaning, just helps you understand more deeply how futile everything is. Intelligence, without purpose, just makes you more aware of how empty everything is. At that moment, he felt as if the world had been stripped of all its illusions. All the pretty lies society tells itself. All the comforting myths people believe to avoid facing the void. Solomon had seen through all of it. And on the other side, nothing. emptiness, futility, unless there's something beyond under the sun, unless there's an above-the-sun reality that changes everything, unless God isn't just a concept, but a living presence who gives meaning to what would otherwise be meaningless. Ecclesiastes 2 verse 25 hints at this crucial distinction. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? Without him, not without wealth, not without success, not without pleasure. Without him, without God, even the simple gifts lose their savor. Without God, even contentment becomes impossible. Without God, everything returns to meaninglessness. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's understanding. He realized that the problem wasn't life itself. The problem was trying to live life without the one who gives life meaning. The problem wasn't that happiness doesn't exist. The problem was looking for it in created things rather than in the Creator. You can't find ultimate meaning in things that are temporary. You can't find eternal satisfaction in experiences that are fleeting. You can't build a life of significance on a foundation that's crumbling. The only thing that lasts is God. The only thing that satisfies eternally is God. The only source of true meaning, genuine joy, and lasting purpose is God Himself. Solomon had finally arrived at the truth he should have started with. And now, with this foundation firmly in place, he was ready to deliver his final verdict, his ultimate conclusion, the truth about happiness that he learned too late but wanted to make sure no one else missed. Solomon had tested everything the world offers. He had exhausted every avenue of human pursuit. And now, finally, he was ready to tell us what actually matters, what actually brings meaning, what actually satisfies the human soul. Ecclesiastes 12 verses 13 to 14 contains his final verdict. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Fear God and keep His commandments. That's it. That's the answer. After 12 chapters of searching, after testing every theory, after trying every path, Solomon arrives at this simple, profound truth. But notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, get rich and you'll be happy. He doesn't say, pursue pleasure and you'll find fulfillment. He doesn't say, achieve great things and you'll discover meaning. He says, fear God. Keep His commandments. The fear of God. Not terror, not cowering in dread, but reverence, awe, a profound respect for who God is, a recognition that we are creatures and He is Creator, that we are finite and He is infinite, that we are temporary and He is eternal. But what no one knew was how hard Solomon had to fight to get back to this truth, because he had known it once. God had appeared to him twice. God had blessed him beyond measure. God had given him everything. But somewhere along the way, Solomon had stopped fearing God and started using God. He had used God's temple to boost his reputation. He had used God's wisdom to impress foreign dignitaries. He had used God's blessings to justify his excesses. He had treated God as a tool for his purposes rather than submitting himself as a tool for God's purposes. And that's when everything fell apart. That's when the emptiness crept in. That's when meaninglessness took over. Because when you lose the fear of the Lord, you lose the foundation for everything else. At that moment, he felt as if the world suddenly made sense in a way it never had before. Not complete sense. He still didn't understand everything, but enough sense. He understood that life isn't about figuring everything out. It's about trusting the one who has figured everything out. Proverbs 9 verse 10, which Solomon wrote earlier in his life, came back to him with new force. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. The beginning of wisdom, not the end result, not the final achievement, the starting point. Everything else builds on this foundation. Without it, nothing else makes sense. Without it, all other pursuits become meaningless. And keep His commandments. This isn't about legalism. This isn't about earning God's favor through perfect obedience. This is about alignment, This is about living in harmony with the way God designed the universe to work. This is about recognizing that God's commands aren't arbitrary rules. They're the operating instructions for human flourishing. When you fear God, you stop trying to be God. When you keep His commandments, you acknowledge that He knows better than you do. When you submit to His authority, you find the freedom that comes from living according to truth rather than chasing lies. And that's when everything changed. Solomon stopped trying to build his own kingdom and started seeking God's kingdom. He stopped demanding answers and started trusting the one who has all the answers. He stopped fighting for control and started surrendering to God's sovereignty. But Solomon knew his message wasn't complete without addressing one final, crucial reality. Because fearing God and keeping His commandments only makes sense if there are consequences for failing to do so. Only makes sense if there's accountability. Only makes sense if there's judgment. And that's exactly what he was about to address. Solomon had arrived at the most uncomfortable truth in all of Scripture. The truth that modern culture desperately wants to avoid. The truth that even religious people often downplay. But it's the truth that makes everything else make sense. God will judge every deed, every word, every thought, every hidden thing. Nothing escapes His notice. Nothing is forgotten. Nothing gets a pass. Ecclesiastes 12 verse 14 declares it clearly. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Every deed, every hidden thing, not just the public actions everyone sees, but the private choices no one knows about. Not just the obvious sins, but the secret compromises. Not just the big failures, but the small betrayals. Everything. For some people, this truth brings terror. For others, it brings hope. For the oppressed who never saw justice in this life, it means their suffering was not in vain. God saw. God remembered. God will make it right. For the wicked who seem to prosper without consequence, it means the bill is coming due. The accounting will happen. Justice delayed is not justice denied. But what no one knew was that this truth transformed how Solomon viewed his entire life. Every moment suddenly mattered, because every moment would be evaluated by God. Not just the public moments, the speeches, the judgments, the temple ceremonies, but the private moments, the secret compromises, the hidden idolatries, the quiet betrayals. Ecclesiastes 11 verse 9 issues a warning specifically to young people. Be happy, young man, while you are young, and let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart and whatever your eyes see, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Follow your heart, yes. Enjoy your youth, yes. But know that judgment is coming. Live with the awareness that your life is being written into an eternal record. Every choice has eternal consequences. Every decision shapes your destiny. This wasn't meant to paralyze people with fear. It was meant to liberate them from the tyranny of the immediate. When you know that God sees everything and will judge everything, you're freed from the pressure to get earthly justice right now. You're freed from the need to defend yourself constantly. You're freed from the anxiety about whether people recognize your worth. God sees. God knows. God will judge, and His judgment is perfect. At that moment, he felt as if the world was no longer a chaotic, random place, but a testing ground, a preparation for eternity. Every trial had purpose. Every joy had meaning. Every choice mattered, because it was shaping who you would be forever. Solomon looked back on his life with this eternal perspective. His wisdom? A gift from God to be used for God's glory, not his own reputation. His wealth? A stewardship to be managed for God's purposes, not his own pleasure. His power? An authority delegated by God to serve God's justice, not his own ambitions. And where he had failed, where he had misused God's gifts, where he had turned aside to idols and pleasures and pride, there would be judgment. Not vindictive punishment, but honest accounting. God would evaluate his stewardship. God would judge his choices. God would separate the gold from the dross. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 17 captures this certainty. I said to myself, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked. For there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. There will be a time, not now necessarily, not according to our schedule, but there will be a time when everything is made right, when every wrong is addressed, when every good deed is rewarded, when every act of faith is vindicated. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's final understanding. Life wasn't meaningless. It was full of meaning because it was preparing you for eternity. Your choices weren't insignificant. They were shaping your eternal destiny. Your time wasn't wasted if you spent it in reverence to God, even if earthly success never came. For the wicked, this is terrifying. But for those who fear God, for those who have placed their trust in Him, for those who have sought His kingdom above all else, this is the most comforting truth in the universe. Your life matters. Your choices matter. Your faithfulness matters. Not because you're building a kingdom here on earth that will last forever, but because you're investing in a kingdom that will never end. But judgment isn't the end of the story. There's one more dimension to Solomon's conclusion. One more crucial element that completes the picture of what true happiness actually looks like. Solomon sat alone in his palace one evening, an old man now, his face lined with regret, his hands trembling not from age, but from the weight of what he had finally understood. And the tears came. Hot, bitter tears for all the wasted years. For all the time he could never get back. He thought about the moment God appeared to him in that dream. Young Solomon, full of promise, asking for wisdom instead of wealth. God had been so pleased, so generous. He had given Solomon everything, wisdom and wealth and honor. The blessing of heaven itself had rested on his shoulders. And what had he done with it? At that moment, he felt as if the world was collapsing around him, because he couldn't escape the haunting question. What if? What if he had stayed faithful? What if he had kept his heart fully devoted to the Lord? What if he had never allowed those foreign wives to turn him toward other gods? What if he had treasured God's presence more than God's gifts? How different would his life have been? How much pain could he have avoided? How much joy had he forfeited? Ecclesiastes 7 verse 29 contains his painful self-awareness. This only have I found. God created mankind upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes. Many schemes. That was his life in a nutshell. God had created him upright, had blessed him beyond measure, but Solomon had gone searching. Searching for happiness in pleasure. Searching for meaning in achievement. Searching for fulfillment in relationships. Searching for satisfaction in wealth. Searching everywhere except in the one who had given him everything. But what no one knew was that Solomon's greatest agony wasn't just his own failure. It was what his failure had cost others. His son Rehoboam, who had grown up watching his father's compromises, who had learned to love power more than God. The kingdom that would soon be torn apart because Solomon had allowed idolatry to take root. The people who would suffer because their king had lost his way. The Bible records in 1 Kings 11 verse 11 God's devastating words. Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Tear the kingdom away. Everything David had fought for. Everything God had built through David's lineage. Everything Solomon himself had spent 40 years consolidating. It would all be ripped apart. Not during Solomon's lifetime. God granted him that mercy for David's sake, but his son would face the consequences of Solomon's sin. Can you imagine carrying that knowledge? Knowing that your choices, your compromises, your wandering heart would destroy your children's inheritance? That your legacy would be division rather than unity? That your name would forever be associated with the beginning of Israel's downfall? Solomon wept, not the quiet tears of gentle sadness, but the gut-wrenching sobs of a man who finally understood what he had lost, who finally grasped the magnitude of his betrayal, who finally felt the full weight of squandered blessing. He remembered the day the temple was dedicated, the glory of the Lord so thick the priests couldn't stand, fire falling from heaven, the presence of God so powerful, so beautiful, so overwhelming. He had stood in that moment and felt God's pleasure, God's approval. God's love, and he had thrown it away. For what? For women who worship demons? For political alliances that required spiritual compromise? For the empty pleasure of having everything his heart desired? At that moment, he felt as if the world was mocking him with the echo of his own foolishness. The wisest man who ever lived had made the stupidest choices imaginable. The man who could solve everyone else's problems couldn't solve his own. The king who wrote proverbs about faithfulness had become the poster child for unfaithfulness. And the cruelest part? He had known better. He had known better. God hadn't left him in ignorance. Deuteronomy 17 verse 17 explicitly warned kings. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. Solomon had read that commandment. He had understood it, and he had ignored it, deliberately, willfully, arrogantly, thinking somehow he was the exception, thinking somehow his wisdom would protect him from the consequences that befell other men. But there are no exceptions to God's laws. There are no shortcuts around obedience. There is no wisdom great enough to make disobedience safe. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's message to future generations. He wasn't writing Ecclesiastes to show off his philosophy. He wasn't sharing his experiments to impress anyone with his intelligence. He was writing with tears streaming down his face, with a broken heart, with desperate urgency. He was writing to save you from making his mistakes, to spare you the agony he couldn't escape, to warn you before it was too late. Don't waste your years chasing what can never satisfy. Don't trade eternal treasure for temporal trash. Don't sacrifice your relationship with God for anything this world offers. Nothing is worth losing God's presence. That was the cry of his heart, the plea of a dying man who had finally learned the truth, but learned it too late to undo the damage. Solomon walked through his palace one night, unable to sleep as usual, and the silence was deafening. Hundreds of rooms, thousands of servants sleeping in distant quarters, 1,000 wives scattered across multiple palaces. And yet, he had never felt more alone in his entire life. This wasn't the loneliness of having no one around. This was worse. This was the loneliness of being surrounded by people and still feeling completely, utterly isolated. The loneliness of success that nobody else understands. The loneliness of achievements that brought no real connection. The loneliness of a soul that had everything except what it actually needed. Ecclesiastes 4 verse 8 perfectly captured his condition, though he had written it years ago without fully understanding its personal application. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. For whom am I toiling? That question haunted him in the dark hours. He had built an empire. For whom? His son, who would squander it? His officials, who would fight over it? His wives, who had never really loved him, only his position? He had achieved everything and had no one to truly share it with. No real companion. No genuine friendship. No authentic intimacy. Just transactions disguised as relationships. Just political arrangements pretending to be love. Just servants performing duties while keeping their hearts carefully guarded. But what no one knew was that Solomon had created this prison himself. Every compromise had added another bar. Every idol had built another wall. Every time he chose pleasure over obedience, success over faithfulness, reputation over relationship with God, he had isolated himself further. At that moment, he felt as if the world had given him everything he asked for and taken everything that mattered. He had 1,000 wives, but not one who truly knew him. He had countless advisors, but none he could be vulnerable with. He had immeasurable wealth, but no one to enjoy it with in genuine joy. And the deepest, most painful loneliness of all, he had distanced himself from God, the one who had appeared to him twice, the one who had blessed him beyond measure, the one who had walked with his father David in intimate fellowship. That relationship, the only one that could have filled the void in his soul, lay shattered by his own choices. He remembered his father David's psalms. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. David had been a warrior, a fugitive, a king who faced constant threats, and yet David had never lost that intimate connection with God. David had sinned, yes, terribly, but David had always run back to God, always repented with genuine brokenness, always prioritized that relationship above everything else. Solomon had inherited his father's throne, but not his father's heart. He had David's kingdom, but not David's passion for God's presence. He had everything David built, but nothing that made David's life truly rich. The tears came again, hot and bitter. Solomon pressed his forehead against the cold stone wall of his palace and let the sobs shake his aging frame. He wept for the intimacy with God he had traded for empty pleasures. He wept for the fellowship he had sacrificed for political alliances. He wept for the presence of God that once filled the temple he built, but now felt distant, unreachable, lost. I had you, he whispered into the darkness. I had your presence. I heard your voice. I felt your pleasure, and I threw it away. For what? For women who worship demons? For gold that brings no comfort? For achievements that mean nothing without you? Ecclesiastes 5 verse 10 echoed in his mind with new, painful clarity. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. He had proven that truth with his life. He had more than enough money, and it was never enough. He had more wealth than any human could spend, and he was never satisfied. Because money can't fill a God-shaped void. Success can't heal a soul separated from its creator. Achievement can't satisfy a heart made for worship. And that's when everything changed in his understanding of what true companionship meant. The problem wasn't that he needed more relationships. The problem was that he had neglected the one relationship that could satisfy his deepest need. The problem wasn't loneliness despite having people around. The problem was separation from God while surrounded by everything else. Jesus would later say, "What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul?" Solomon was living proof of that devastating truth. He had gained the whole world, literally, and he had forfeited his soul in the process. But even in his brokenness, even in his failure, even in his crushing loneliness, Solomon was discovering something, a glimmer, a whisper, a possibility that maybe, just maybe, God hadn't completely abandoned him, that maybe there was still a path back, that maybe repentance, genuine repentance, could restore what sin had destroyed. That fragile hope was about to lead him to his final, most important revelation. There comes a moment in every prodigal's journey when the illusions finally shatter, when the lies stop working, when you can't pretend anymore, when you're forced to face the brutal, unvarnished truth about what you've become. For Solomon, that moment came in the middle of a feast. He sat on his throne, surrounded by music and laughter, wine flowing freely, entertainers performing, his wives adorned in jewels, his officials celebrating another successful year. Everything looked perfect. Everything appeared successful. From the outside, it was the picture of blessing and abundance. But inside, Solomon felt like he was dying. He looked around at the celebration and suddenly saw it with different eyes. The laughter sounded hollow. The music felt empty. The faces around him seemed like masks hiding the same emptiness he felt. And in that moment of clarity, a thought hit him with devastating force. This is hell. This is what it means to have everything and nothing at the same time. At that moment, he felt as if the world stopped spinning. The noise faded, the colors dimmed, and he heard, deep in his spirit, a voice he hadn't heard in years. Not audible, not external, but unmistakable. How long, Solomon? How long will you chase what can never satisfy? How long will you run from the only one who can fill the void in your soul? The tears started before he could stop them. Right there, in the middle of the feast, in front of everyone, the wisest, richest, most powerful man in the world began to weep. Not quiet tears. Gut-wrenching, shoulder-shaking sobs that he couldn't control and didn't try to hide. The music stopped. The laughter died. Everyone stared in shock as their king, the man who had everything, broke down completely. But what no one knew was that this wasn't weakness. This was the first moment of strength Solomon had shown in decades. This was the beginning of his journey back. This was repentance, raw and real and utterly devastating. Psalm 51, written by his father David after his own catastrophic failure with Bathsheba, flooded Solomon's mind. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. David had been here. David had felt this crushing weight of failure. David had experienced this soul-deep brokenness. And David had discovered that God doesn't despise a broken and contrite heart. Solomon stood, his legs trembling, his face wet with tears, and spoke words that shocked everyone in the room. This feast is over. Everyone leave. Now, they hesitated, confused, uncertain. Solomon raised his voice, not in anger, but in desperate urgency. I said leave. All of you. I need to be alone with God. The palace emptied quickly, servants and wives and officials retreating in bewildered silence. And Solomon, the king of Israel, fell to his knees in the throne room, alone with the God he had betrayed for so long. I'm sorry. The words came out as a whisper, then louder, then as a cry that echoed off the walls. I'm so sorry. I had everything. You gave me everything, and I threw it away. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He stayed on his knees for hours. No fancy prayers, no eloquent speeches, just brokenness, just honesty, just a man who had finally stopped running and was facing the reality of his own soul. And in that place of utter brokenness, something shifted. Not audibly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Solomon felt it. A warmth, a presence, a whisper in his spirit that said what his father David had heard years before. I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. I know your heart. And that's when everything changed. Not externally. The palace was still there. The wives were still there. The wealth was still there. The consequences of his choices couldn't be undone. But internally, Solomon felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Hope. Not hope that everything would be perfect. Not hope that he could undo the past. But hope that maybe, just maybe, God's mercy was bigger than his failure. That maybe forgiveness was possible. That maybe the story wasn't over yet. Ecclesiastes 7 verse 20 suddenly made sense in a new way. Indeed, there is no one on earth who is righteous, no one who does what is right and never sins. No one, not even Solomon, not even David, not even the greatest heroes of faith. Everyone fails. Everyone falls. Everyone sins. The question isn't whether you'll fail. The question is what you do after you fail. Do you stay down? Do you give up? Do you let shame and regret define you? Or do you get up broken and humbled and turn back to the God who's been waiting for you all along? Solomon chose to get up. And in that choice, in that broken, tear-stained moment of repentance, he finally began to understand what true happiness actually is. In the days following his breakdown, Solomon began to see everything differently. It was as if scales had fallen from his eyes, and the revelation that came to him shook the very foundation of everything he had been searching for. He had been asking the wrong question all along. For decades he had been asking, what will make me happy? And he had tested every possible answer. Pleasure, achievement, relationships, wealth, wisdom, power, everything. But sitting in the silence of genuine repentance, broken before God, Solomon suddenly understood. Happiness was never supposed to be the goal. Happiness was always meant to be the byproduct. The goal was God. The goal was holiness. The goal was living in alignment with the one who created you. And when you get that right, when you pursue God above everything else, happiness follows naturally, not as something you chase, but as something that overtakes you. At that moment, he felt as if the world had been turned right side up after years of being upside down. He had been living backwards. He had been treating God as a means to an end, as a tool for achieving happiness, rather than recognizing that God himself is the end, is the purpose, is the point of everything. Jesus would later say it perfectly, centuries after Solomon. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Not seek happiness and add God to help you get it. Seek God first. Make his kingdom your priority. Make his righteousness your goal. And everything else, including the happiness you're desperately chasing, will be added to you. Solomon opened his scroll and began to write with trembling hands. Not the cynical observations that had filled earlier chapters of Ecclesiastes. Not the bitter complaints about meaninglessness. But truth. Hard-won, painfully learned, life-transforming truth. But what no one knew was that this revelation cost Solomon everything to discover. He had to lose it all, or at least lose the illusion that any of it mattered without God, before he could find what actually satisfies. He wrote about the simple farmer again, but this time with different eyes. That farmer wasn't happy because his life was easy. He wasn't satisfied because he had everything he wanted. He was content because he lived in simple obedience to God. He worked his field as unto the Lord. He ate his bread with gratitude to God. He slept peacefully because he trusted God with tomorrow. The farmer had what Solomon, with all his sophistication, had been missing: a proper relationship with God. Not a religious performance, not a transactional arrangement, but genuine fellowship, real relationship, daily dependence, moment-by-moment trust. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 took on new meaning. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. Set eternity in the human heart. That's why nothing earthly ever satisfies. That's why pleasure always disappoints. That's why achievement always feels hollow. That's why wealth can't buy peace. We were made for eternity, and only eternal things can fulfill us. And the only eternal thing that matters? God himself. Not religion about God. Not theology concerning God. Not rituals performed for God. But God. His presence. His love. His fellowship. His glory. Him. Solomon wept again, but these were different tears. Not the bitter tears of regret, though those still came. These were tears of wonder, of gratitude, of awe that God would still receive him, that mercy was still available, that it wasn't too late even for him. You were always there, Solomon whispered to the God he could finally sense again. All those years I was searching, you were right there. I just couldn't see you because I was looking everywhere else. I was chasing your gifts instead of pursuing you. I was using your blessings as a substitute for your presence. Forgive me. Oh God, forgive me. And in that moment, Solomon experienced something he had spent his entire life searching for, but never quite finding. Joy. Not happiness. Joy. Happiness depends on circumstances. Joy transcends them. Happiness is emotional. Joy is spiritual. Happiness comes and goes. Joy remains even in suffering because it's rooted in something unchanging. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's understanding of the human condition. We're not primarily designed for happiness. We're designed for worship. We're not created mainly for pleasure. We're created for God's glory. We're not here to accumulate and achieve and experience. We're here to know God, to love God, to worship God, to reflect God's image. And when we do that, when we live for the purpose we were created for, happiness stops being something we chase and becomes something we experience. Not constantly, not perfectly, not without pain, but genuinely, deeply, satisfyingly. Solomon finally understood what his father David had known all along. The secret wasn't in having more. It was in wanting God more than anything else. The key wasn't achieving success. It was treasuring God above every success. The answer wasn't getting everything you desire. It was desiring God above everything you could get. That was the truth about happiness that he had learned too late. But it wasn't too late to share it. It wasn't too late to warn others. It wasn't too late to write it down so that future generations wouldn't have to learn it the hard way. Solomon remembered the day he had asked God for wisdom. He had been so young, so earnest, so full of good intentions, and God had been pleased with that request. So pleased that he had given Solomon not just wisdom, but wealth and honor as well. But now, decades later, Solomon understood something crucial that he had missed back then. Wisdom wasn't just about being smart. It wasn't just about solving problems or making good decisions or understanding complex matters. True wisdom, real wisdom, the kind that actually transforms your life and leads to genuine flourishing, begins with one thing: the fear of the Lord. Proverbs 9 verse 10, which Solomon himself had written years ago, now burned in his mind with fresh intensity. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. The beginning of wisdom, not the middle, not the end, the foundation, the starting point. Everything else builds on this, or it's not really wisdom at all. It's just cleverness, intelligence, information, but not wisdom. Solomon had been wise without truly fearing God. He had knowledge without reverence. He had understanding without submission. And that kind of wisdom, brilliant as it may be, leads nowhere good. In fact, it's dangerous because it makes you think you're on the right path when you're actually lost. At that moment, he felt as if the world was revealing a secret that changes everything. The fear of the Lord isn't about being terrified of God. It's about being in awe of Him. It's about recognizing who He is and who you are in comparison. It's about understanding that He is creator and you are creature. He is infinite and you are finite. He is eternal and you are temporary. He is holy and you are not. And when you truly grasp that, when you truly fear God in the proper sense, everything else in your life finds its proper place. Your pleasures become gifts to enjoy, not gods to worship. Your achievements become offerings to God, not monuments to yourself. Your relationships become opportunities to love, not transactions for personal gain. Your wealth becomes a stewardship, not a security. But what no one knew was that you can't manufacture the fear of the Lord. You can't work it up through effort. It comes from encounter, from seeing God as He truly is, from experiencing His holiness, His power, His love, His justice, His mercy. Solomon had experienced that twice in his life. Once in the dream at Gibeon when God appeared and offered him anything. Once at the temple dedication when God's glory filled the building so powerfully the priests couldn't stand. But somewhere along the way, he had lost that sense of awe. God had become familiar, comfortable, predictable, safe. And when God becomes safe in your mind, when you stop fearing Him in holy reverence, that's when you start to wander. Ecclesiastes 12 verse 13 crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity now. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. This is the duty, not just Solomon's duty, not just Israel's duty. All mankind, every person who ever lived, every human heart that beats, every soul that draws breath. This is what we were created for. This is our purpose. This is our meaning. Fear God, not as in cower in terror, but as in stand in awe. Reverence Him, worship Him, recognize His worthiness, acknowledge His authority, submit to His lordship, trust His goodness, surrender to His sovereignty, and keep His commandments. Not to earn His love, you can't. Not to purchase His favor, it's already yours if you fear Him. But because His commandments are the pathway to life. They're not arbitrary rules designed to restrict your freedom. They're loving instructions from your Creator about how to flourish as a human being. Solomon thought about all the times he had ignored God's commandments. The explicit prohibition against taking many wives. The clear warning against allowing your heart to be turned after other gods. The repeated call to wholehearted devotion. He had known those commandments. He had read them. He had understood them intellectually. But he hadn't feared God enough to obey them. He had thought he was the exception. He had believed his wisdom made him exempt. He had assumed he could handle what had destroyed other men. And he had been catastrophically wrong. At that moment, he felt as if the world was showing him the difference between head knowledge and heart transformation. You can know truth without living it. You can understand principles without applying them. You can have all the right theology and still have a wrong heart. The fear of the Lord bridges that gap. It takes knowledge from your head to your heart. It transforms information into transformation. It turns doctrine into devotion. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's final message. He wasn't just offering intellectual insights. He wasn't just sharing philosophical observations. He was pleading, with tears in his eyes and desperation in his voice, for people to learn what he had learned before it was too late. Fear God. Please fear God. Not someday. Not later. Not when you're older and wiser and more mature. Now. Today. This moment. Because tomorrow is not guaranteed, and the cost of living without the fear of the Lord is higher than you can imagine. Solomon was about to deliver his final warning, the most urgent, most passionate, most crucial message of all. And he prayed that someone, anyone, would hear it and respond before they made his mistakes. Solomon looked at the young people of his kingdom with eyes full of tears and a heart breaking with urgency. He saw them making the same mistakes he had made, believing the same lies he had believed, chasing the same empty promises he had chased. And he couldn't stay silent. He had to warn them. He had to tell them the truth before they wasted their lives the way he had wasted his. Ecclesiastes 11 verses 9 to 10 became his passionate plea. Be happy, young man, while you are young, and let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart and whatever your eyes see, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. So then, banish anxiety from your heart and cast off the troubles of your body, for youth and vigor are meaningless. Listen to the tension in those words. Enjoy your youth, yes. Let your heart have joy, yes. Follow your desires, yes. But, and this is crucial, know that God will bring you into judgment. Live with that awareness. Make choices with that truth in mind. Don't be reckless. Don't be foolish. Don't throw away your future for temporary pleasure. Solomon wished desperately that someone had grabbed him by the shoulders when he was young and shaken him and said, "Listen to me. I know it seems like you have all the time in the world. I know it feels like consequences are far away. I know you think you're the exception, that you can handle what destroyed others. But you're not. You can't. And the price is higher than you can imagine." But what no one knew was that Solomon was speaking from the deepest place of regret a human can experience. The regret of realizing you threw away something precious that you can never get back. Time, youth, opportunity, the chance to build a life on the right foundation from the beginning instead of having to tear everything down and start over when you're old and tired. At that moment, he felt as if the world needed to hear this message more than any sermon, more than any teaching, more than any piece of advice he had ever given. Don't wait. Don't delay. Don't think you have time to waste on foolishness and still course correct later. He had seen too many young people in his court who reminded him of himself. Brilliant, talented, full of potential, and arrogant, thinking they knew better. Thinking the old wisdom didn't apply to them, thinking they could outsmart consequences. And he watched them crash. He watched them fall. He watched them waste their gifts and destroy their futures and break their own hearts, all while thinking they were too smart to fail. "Please," Solomon whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Please don't be me. Don't spend 40 years building on the wrong foundation. Don't trade your relationship with God for anything this world offers. Don't sacrifice the eternal for the temporary. Don't choose pleasure over purpose. Don't chase success at the cost of your soul." Ecclesiastes 12 verse 1 contains his most urgent warning. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach when you will say, "I find no pleasure in them." Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, not later, not when you're old, Not after you've sown your wild oats and gotten it out of your system. Now, while you're young, while you have energy, while you have time, while you still have the strength to build, right, instead of spending your later years trying to repair what you broke. Because the days of trouble are coming. The years when pleasure fades and joints ache and energy wanes and regret haunts you. Those years will arrive. And when they do, if you haven't built your life on God, if you haven't established that foundation early, you'll find yourself exactly where Solomon found himself. Empty, broken, full of regret, wishing desperately that you could go back and do it differently. But you can't go back. Time only moves forward. Choices have consequences. Seeds planted in youth produce harvests in old age. And if you plant the wrong seeds, you'll reap the wrong harvest. And by then it's too late to plant again. Solomon thought about his son Rehoboam, young, foolish, surrounded by advisors, his own age, who told him what he wanted to hear instead of what he needed to know. And Solomon could see the disaster coming. He could see his son making the exact mistakes that would destroy the kingdom. But Rehoboam wouldn't listen, just like Solomon hadn't listened to the warnings in his own youth. The cycle was repeating, and it broke Solomon's heart. And that's when everything changed in his urgency to reach the next generation. This wasn't just about him anymore. This wasn't just about his own regret. This was about preventing others from experiencing the same pain. This was about saving them from wasting their lives the way he had wasted his. "I'm telling you the truth," Solomon said, his voice rising with passion. "Everything I chased was empty. Everything I built without God crumbled. Everything I achieved for my own glory meant nothing. Everything I accumulated couldn't satisfy. Everything I experienced without reverence for God left me hollow. But God, oh God, He is enough. He is sufficient. He is the only thing that truly satisfies. He is the only foundation that lasts. He is the only treasure worth pursuing. And if you make Him your priority, if you seek Him first, if you build your life on Him, everything else will fall into place. Not perfectly, not without pain, but meaningfully, purposefully, joyfully. Please don't learn this lesson the way I did. Don't wait until you're old and broken and full of regret. Start now, today, this moment. Fear God. Keep His commandments. Make Him your treasure, and you'll discover the happiness I spent my entire life searching for, but only found when I finally surrendered everything to Him. That was Solomon's warning. That was his plea. That was his final attempt to save others from his mistakes. And he prayed with everything in him that someone would listen. Solomon's hands trembled as he reached the final pages of his manuscript. He was old now, so old. His body was failing. His strength was fading. And he knew, with a certainty that only the dying possess, that his time was running out. But before he died, he had one more truth to share. The hardest truth. The most uncomfortable truth. The truth that modern culture desperately tries to ignore, but that ancient wisdom has always understood. Death is not the end. It's the beginning of the accounting. Ecclesiastes 12 verse 7 describes what happens. The dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. The spirit returns to God, not to nothingness, not to oblivion, not to peaceful non-existence. To God, the God who created you, the God who gave you life, the God who will now evaluate how you live that life. And then comes the verse that makes Solomon's entire message finally make complete sense. Ecclesiastes 12 verse 14, the final verdict, the ultimate conclusion. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Every deed, every word, every thought, every secret sin, every hidden compromise, every moment when you chose self over God, every time you knew the right thing and did the wrong thing anyway, everything. At that moment, he felt as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for humanity to understand what this means. Your life is not meaningless. Far from it. Your life has eternal significance because every choice you make is being recorded. Every decision matters because it will be evaluated. Every moment counts because you will give account for all of them. For some people, this truth brings terror. And honestly, it should. If you've lived your life without God, if you've pursued your own desires above His will, if you've ignored His commandments and rejected His lordship, then judgment is terrifying. Because you will stand before perfect holiness, and your life will be measured against perfect righteousness, and you will be found wanting. But for those who fear God, for those who have lived in humble obedience, for those who have failed, yes, but repented, for those who have built their lives on the foundation of relationship with God, judgment is not terrifying. It's vindicating. Solomon thought about all the injustice he had witnessed. The righteous who suffered, the poor who were oppressed, the honest who were cheated, the faithful who were persecuted. All those cases where earthly justice failed, where the wicked prospered and the good suffered. But what no one knew was that God was keeping a record. God was watching. God was remembering. And on the day of judgment, every wrong would be addressed. Every tear would be accounted for. Every act of faithfulness, even if no human ever noticed it, would be rewarded. That widow who gave her last coins to God's work, God saw. That servant who remained faithful even when his master was cruel, God remembered. That person who chose obedience over opportunity, who chose integrity over advancement, who chose God over gain. It wasn't wasted. It wasn't meaningless. God noticed, and God will reward. Solomon wept as he wrote these final words, tears dropping onto the parchment and smearing the ink. He wept for the years he had wasted. He wept for the opportunities he had squandered. He wept for the pain his choices had caused. He wept for the legacy of division rather than unity that he would leave behind. But he also wept with relief, because judgment, as terrifying as it is, also means that nothing is ultimately meaningless. It means that your faithfulness matters, even when no one sees it. It means that your obedience counts, even when it costs you. It means that choosing God over the world's offers is not foolishness, but the wisest decision you could possibly make. At that moment, he felt as if the world was finally coming into focus after decades of blur. This life is not all there is. This world is not the final word. Death is not the end. There is justice coming. There is accountability. There is meaning and purpose and significance to how you live, because God is watching, God is recording, and God will bring everything into judgment. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 17 had promised it. I said to myself, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. There will be a time. Not maybe, not possibly, will. It's certain. It's guaranteed. It's inevitable. And how you live in light of that truth determines everything about your eternal destiny. And that's when everything changed in Solomon's final message. This wasn't just philosophical musing. This wasn't just intellectual exploration. This was urgent, desperate, pleading truth from a man standing on the edge of eternity, looking back at his life and forward to his judgment. Listen to me. Solomon's words seem to cry out from the page. I'm about to face this judgment. I'm about to stand before God and give account for every choice I made, every compromise I accepted, every commandment I ignored. And I'm telling you, with every fiber of my being, with the urgency of a dying man who has no time left for games or pretense, fear God. Keep His commandments. Live with eternity in mind. Because this world is temporary, but the judgment is eternal, and how you respond to that truth determines your forever. Solomon set down his pen. His manuscript was complete. His message was finished. His warning had been given. Now all he could do was pray that someone somewhere in some generation yet to come would read his words and choose differently, would learn from his mistakes, would find the truth about happiness before it was too late. He had one final message to deliver. One last truth to share, the culmination of everything he had learned. And it would either transform your life or condemn you. Everything depended on how you responded. Solomon sat alone in his chamber, the manuscript of Ecclesiastes spread before him, and he knew this was it, his final words. his last chance to tell the world what he had learned, his ultimate message to every person who would ever read his words. And so, with tears streaming down his weathered face, with a heart full of both regret and redemption, with the urgency of a man who had wasted so much time but finally understood the truth, Solomon wrote his conclusion. The truth about happiness that he learned too late. The secret that most people miss. The revelation that changes everything. Here it is. Happiness was never meant to be found. It was meant to be received. You can't chase it. You can't manufacture it. You can't achieve it or earn it or buy it or seduce it into your life. Happiness is a gift, a byproduct, a result of living in right relationship with God. Ecclesiastes 12 verses 13 to 14 contains Solomon's final verdict, his ultimate conclusion, the summary of everything he had learned. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Fear God. Keep his commandments. That's it. That's the answer. That's the secret. Not complicated. Not mysterious. Not hidden in some esoteric knowledge available only to the enlightened few. Fear God. Recognize who he is. Stand in awe of his holiness. Tremble at his power. Marvel at his love. Worship his majesty. Submit to his authority. Trust his goodness. Keep his commandments. Not to earn his love, you already have it. Not to purchase salvation, you can't. But because his commandments are the pathway to life. They're the instruction manual for human flourishing. They're the loving guidance from your Creator about how to live in a way that brings true joy. At that moment, he felt as if the world was finally seeing clearly what had been obscured by the fog of his own pride and foolishness for so long. The meaning of life isn't hidden. It's revealed. The path to happiness isn't secret. It's spelled out clearly. The way to fulfillment isn't complicated. It's simple. But simple doesn't mean easy. Because fearing God means you can't worship yourself. Keeping his commandments means you can't do whatever you want. Living for God's glory means you can't live for your own. Following Jesus, whom Solomon's life pointed toward, means dying to yourself. And that's why most people miss the truth about happiness. Because they're not willing to pay the price. They want happiness on their terms. They want fulfillment without surrender. They want joy without sacrifice. They want the gift without the giver. But it doesn't work that way. It can't work that way. Because you were created for God, and until you find your rest in him, your soul will never be satisfied. Nothing else will work. Nothing else can work. Solomon had proven it definitively. He had tested every alternative. Pleasure? Meaningless. Achievement? Empty. Wealth? Unsatisfying. Relationships? Disappointing. Wisdom without God? Painful. Success without purpose? Hollow. Everything under the sun, everything this world offers, everything you can see and touch and accumulate and experience, all of it is meaningless if you're trying to use it as a substitute for God. But when you fear God, when you keep his commandments, when you make him your treasure, then suddenly everything else finds its proper place. Pleasure becomes a gift to enjoy rather than a God to worship. Achievement becomes an offering to God rather than a monument to yourself. Wealth becomes a stewardship rather than a security. Relationships become opportunities to love rather than transactions for personal gain. And happiness? Happiness stops being something you chase and becomes something you experience as you walk in obedience to God. Not constantly, not without pain, not perfectly in this broken world, but genuinely, deeply, satisfyingly. This is what I learned too late, Solomon whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. This is what I want you to understand before you waste your life the way I wasted mine. God is enough. He is sufficient. He is the only thing that truly satisfies. And everything else is just chasing wind. I had everything this world could offer, and I was miserable. But when I finally surrendered to God, when I finally feared him and committed to keeping his commandments, when I finally made him my priority instead of my accessory, I found what I had been searching for all along. Not happiness as the world defines it. Something better. Something deeper. Something that survives suffering and transcends circumstances. Joy, peace, purpose, meaning. The assurance that my life matters because I'm living for something eternal. The confidence that my choices count because God is watching and will reward faithfulness. The hope that death is not the end, but the doorway to perfect fellowship with the one I was created for. And that's when everything changed. Not just for Solomon, but for everyone who would read his words and respond. Because this message, this truth, this revelation, it has the power to transform your life if you'll receive it. Stop chasing happiness. Start seeking God. Stop trying to manufacture meaning. Start surrendering to the one who gives meaning. Stop building your life on the temporary. Start investing in the eternal. Fear God. Keep his commandments. Live with eternity in mind. And you will discover that the happiness you've been desperately searching for has been waiting for you all along. Not at the end of your own pursuits, but in the presence of the God who created you for himself. This is the truth about happiness that King Solomon learned too late. But it's not too late for you. Not yet. Not today. You still have time. You still have opportunity. You still have the chance to learn from his mistakes rather than repeating them. So what will you choose? Will you chase the wind like Solomon did for 40 years? Or will you learn from his hard-won wisdom and seek God first? Your happiness, your meaning, your purpose, your eternal destiny, it all hangs on how you answer that question. Fear God. Keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. This is the truth Solomon died wishing he had lived sooner. Don't make his mistake. Amen. If this message has pierced your heart, if you're recognizing yourself in Solomon's story, if you're ready to stop chasing wind and start seeking God, I want to hear from you. Comment below and tell me what God spoke to your heart today. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Life in Christ. Because we're not done exploring God's Word. We're not done discovering truths that transform lives. We're not done walking this journey of faith together. Remember, your story doesn't have to end like Solomon's almost did. You can turn to God today. You can find the happiness you've been searching for. You can discover that true joy, lasting peace, and eternal purpose are found in Jesus Christ, who fulfilled everything Solomon pointed toward. God bless you. And until next time, may you fear God, keep his commandments, and discover the happiness that can only be found in him.